A convict carved more than 180 individual designs into a sandstone bridge, and was pardoned for the beauty of his work. Most people assume the finest Georgian stonework stayed in Britain. This bridge is in a village of 400 people in the Tasmanian Midlands, and the house next door costs less than half a Melbourne median. One town on this list is not for sale at any price, not because it's too expensive, but because every building is owned by a Spanish monastery. And the most famous European-looking town in the country opens this list at number 12, because it proves exactly the wrong thing about affordability. Aussie Backroads looks at what property marketing skips over: the real heritage, the real price, and the honest reason each place costs what it costs. If that's what you're after, subscribe before we start. Here are 12 Australian towns that could pass for Europe, ranked by how convincingly they pull it off and how little they cost. Number 12, Hahndorf, South Australia. Let's begin with the one everyone already knows, because knowing it is exactly the problem. Hahndorf is Australia's oldest surviving German settlement. Lutheran families fleeing religious persecution in Prussia founded it in 1839, and their descendants kept the character. A main street of timbered German-influenced buildings, beer halls and bakeries that genuinely reads as a slice of Bavaria. On a cold Saturday morning with the smell of fresh bread and the sound of German place names on shopfront signs, you could convince yourself you were deep in regional Germany. That is not exaggeration. It is one of the more astonishing things this country quietly contains. And then you check the price. The median house in Hahndorf has climbed to around $1.2 million. That is more than a house in Adelaide itself, 25 minutes down the freeway. For a retiree hoping to stretch superannuation across 20 years, that number closes the door before the conversation starts. What happened is simple. Fame and commutability arrived together. Hahndorf is close enough to Adelaide to attract professionals who want a lifestyle address, and famous enough to draw a tourist trade that inflates every cafe and gallery lease on the main street. The town that looks most convincingly German is now a premium commuter enclave, and the heritage that draws visitors has been priced out of reach of the people who might actually stay. That makes Hahndorf the benchmark for this list. Everything below it is the search for the same feeling. The old stone, the European character, the sense of being somewhere that forgot to be Australia, for far less money. How far below Hahndorf each town sits tells you almost as much as the price itself. Number 11, Richmond, Tasmania. 25 minutes from Hobart, in the Coal River Valley, and it holds a run of Australian records that no town its size should logically hold. The Richmond Bridge, built by convict labour between 1823 and 1825, is the oldest stone arch bridge still in use in the country. St. John's Church is the oldest continuously used Catholic church in Australia. The 1825 jail predates Port Arthur. 50-odd Georgian buildings line the main street in a way that gives it the character of an English market town on a still morning. The proportions, the stonework, the rhythm of the shop fronts. For a couple thinking about where to spend the next 20 years, Richmond offers something rare. A capital city practically on the doorstep, which means Hobart's hospitals and services are not a planning consideration but a short drive. That practical anchor matters more than it sounds at this stage of life. What Hobart's proximity giveth, the property market taketh. Being a short, pretty drive from a state capital turned Richmond into a premium heritage and tourism town years ago. The median house here now sits near $1 million. It is Georgian England on the outside and capital city pricing on the inside. The village reads like the Cotswolds. It is priced like a Canberra suburb. Number 10, Beechworth, Victoria. 32 heritage-listed buildings of honey-coloured local granite. Wide streets lined with mature English elms and oaks that turn gold and amber in autumn, a namesake taken straight from Leicestershire. Beechworth is widely considered the best-preserved gold rush town in Victoria, and it has a genuine piece of Australian mythology embedded in its courthouse. Ned Kelly's committal hearing was held here, and the Kelly precinct still draws visitors who come for the history and end up staying for the streetscape. Walk those granite footpaths on a midweek morning with few tourists about and the town does something unusual. It makes you forget briefly which continent you're on. Melbourne tree changers noticed that effect. They arrived in numbers, chasing exactly the English village feel, and the price moved accordingly. Beechworth's median house is now well past $700,000, and by some measures pushing $850,000. It is beautiful. That is not in question. But it is now firmly in the half of this list where the European feeling is real and so is the cost. For a buyer who has already sold a Melbourne property and wants to reinvest the equity into something genuinely historic, Beechworth is worth considering on its merits. For anyone trying to make a pension and modest superannuation stretch, The arithmetic is unkind. Number 9, Stanley, Tasmania. A colonial fishing village at the far northwestern tip of the state, huddled beneath the Nut, a flat-topped volcanic plug that rises 300 feet straight from the water like something left behind by a more dramatic geology. Stanley was founded in 1826 as the operational base of the Van Diemen's Land Company, and it kept its English colonial character with unusual fidelity. St. James Presbyterian Church was bought prefabricated and shipped directly from Britain in the 1850s. The congregation didn't wait for local stone, they ordered the building. Joseph Lyons, the only Tasmanian to become Prime Minister, was born here. A village this small carrying that kind of history is rare. The drive from Hobart is more than 4 hours. That is the foundational fact for anyone in their 60s or beyond who is managing an ongoing condition. Stanley is not close to anything. For a Saturday drive, that is atmosphere. For a medical appointment, that is a full day. And then the other issue, Stanley's median house has risen by nearly a third in a single year to around $700,000. That surge is recent enough that the town's older reputation for accessibility may still be circulating in conversation, but the numbers no longer support it. The postcard is genuine, the isolation is honest, and the price is now chasing the postcard. Number 8, Castlemaine, Victoria. The gold rush wealth of the 1850s built this town fast and built it grandly, and the buildings it left behind are almost entirely intact. The classical market building of 1862, the Italian Palazzo Post Office of the 1870s, the Grand Town Hall of 1898. Walk the main street and the architectural density of the goldfields era is immediate. This was a prosperous town, and the stonework still says so. Castlemaine has reinvented itself in the decades since as an arts town. A major festival draws creative workers from Melbourne, and a steady migration of artists, writers and makers has followed. On a Thursday afternoon, you might find a ceramic studio open beside a heritage building that has stood since Ned Kelly was a teenager. The cultural mix is genuine, not performed, which is part of why the price moved. Castlemaine's median house now sits around $720,000 to $740,000. The Gold Rush streetscape is intact. The bargain is not. For a retiree looking at the Victorian goldfields as the answer, Castlemaine is the premium option, a Melbourne satellite that happens to look like Victorian England, and priced accordingly. Number 7, Yackandandah, Victoria. There is a village in northeast Victoria whose entire main street of 1850s to 1880s gold rush buildings is heritage protected as a conservation area. Old brick stores, a former bank that now houses the local museum, the proportions of a gold rush commercial street intact from the footpath to the roofline. Yak, the town accepts the nickname, also has a running bet with the future. It operates a community-owned service station, and the town has set itself the goal of becoming entirely powered by community-owned renewable energy. Annual folk festival. Median age apparently young enough to turn out for an outdoor stage. A bowls club where Tuesday afternoons take a specific familiar shape. 1,100 people live here. The median house has reached around $750,000. That is the tension this town cannot quite resolve. A European village scale and atmosphere, and a price that is not European village at all. The community spirit is real. The independence is genuine. The cost per resident is one of the highest on this list. For a buyer who has already done the sums and values that combination, real heritage, working community, northeast Victorian landscape, Yackandandah delivers what it promises. The question is whether the price leaves enough in reserve for the years that follow. Number 6, Maldon, Victoria. In 1966, Maldon became the first town in Australia the National Trust classified a notable town. That recognition has not moved. The entire preserved gold rush streetscape of solid stone buildings and decorative Victorian shopfronts is still there, still intact, still looking like mid-Victorian rural England on a grey morning. The Victorian Goldfields Railway runs a 19th century steam branch line from here. A working steam train through Goldfields country is not a theme park attraction but a piece of actually operating heritage. The Maldon Easter Fair claims the title of Australia's oldest continuously held fair. The median age in Maldon runs around 60. That tells you something about the town's character. It draws people who want quiet heritage and mean it, but it also makes the health access question pressing. The idea doesn't specify what local services exist, so the honest note is this. At 60, as a median, in a small heritage town, the distance to specialist care is worth establishing before any commitment is made, not after. The median house sits around $730,000. Maldon's heritage pedigree is, by any measure, the strongest on this part of the list. Its affordability has quietly slipped to match. It belongs in the beautiful but no longer cheap band, and it knows it. If you've stayed this far, the towns still to come are the ones where the European character holds and the price starts to actually move. Subscribe, the ones below, are where this list earns its keep. Number 5, Tanunda, South Australia. The Barossa Valley's most German town, and the one that held its character longest. Silesian Lutheran immigrants arrived from the 1840s and settled in deep. Tanunda has 4 separate Lutheran churches. The German bakeries and butchers still make traditional wurst. A lingering local dialect, Barossa Deutsch, surfaces at the Saturday market, in older conversations, in the names on the shop fronts. It is not a heritage performance for visitors. It is what happens when a community stays in one place for 180 years and doesn't particularly want to change. Drive out of town in any direction and you are in vines, some of the oldest shiraz plantings on earth. The valley light in the late afternoon is the kind that makes everything look like it was composed. On a winter Tuesday, buying bread from a German bakery in a wine valley that predates Federation, you could be somewhere in a region of Germany you've never heard of. That sensation is precisely what this video is tracking. Tanunda is cheaper than Hahndorf. But the wine country premium has been working on its median for years, and it now sits somewhere between $630,000 and $740,000, moving upward. It half keeps the promise, genuinely German, genuinely beautiful, for real but not tiny money. For a retiree who can manage that figure and wants the character without the tourist crush of Hahndorf, Tanunda is a meaningful step down in price and a meaningful step up in authenticity. Number 4, New Norcia, Western Australia. 130 kilometres north of Perth, in the flat scrub of the wheatbelt, round a bend on a long straight road. And there it is. Ochre Mediterranean walls, bell towers, cloisters. A monastery rising from the Australian wheatbelt like a village in northern Spain was quietly relocated, and nobody told the landscape. Spanish Benedictine monks founded New Norcia in 1846 and named it after Norcia in Italy, the birthplace of St. Benedict. The abbey church dates to 1861. 2 great colleges, designed in Byzantine and Neo-Gothic styles, went up in the early 1900s. The architecture is not an approximation of European monastic building. It is the genuine article, built by people who knew the original and reproduced it in a country that had never seen anything like it. This is the single most startling place on this list. Nothing else in Australia produces that particular moment of incomprehension, the sense that the landscape and the buildings are from different planets and somehow ended up adjacent. The practical question answers itself quickly. You cannot move here. Every building is owned by the Benedictine community. There is no house to purchase at any price, at any specification. New Norcia is the list's pure spectacle, the most European thing in the country, and the one entry where the notion of costs less dissolves entirely, because the commodity is not for sale. It earns its place because it demonstrates something true about how this country was built. Europe arrived here at full intensity, and sometimes it arrived in places that still, more than a century and a half later, look like they belong to a different map entirely. Still to come, a convict who carved his way to freedom. And the village he left behind that costs less than a city studio. Number 3, Evandale, Tasmania. 20 minutes south of Launceston in the Midlands, and of all the towns on this list, it is the one that most simply, without effort, is an English Georgian village. Streets lined with late Georgian and early Victorian buildings, some dating back past 1820. Clarendon House, built in 1838, sits just outside town, one of the finest Georgian mansions in the country, symmetrical and wide, and built in the confident style of people who assumed the form was permanent. It is not a ruin or a tourist reconstruction. It is intact. Every February, Evandale holds the National Penny Farthing Championships. Grown men in period gear race high-wheeled Victorian bicycles down the main street past buildings that were old when those bicycles were new. As spectacles go, it is on theme to a degree that feels almost contrived, except that it's been happening for decades and the town simply treats it as February. For anyone managing specialist care, 20 minutes to Launceston means regional hospital access is practical, not theoretical. That is a meaningful distance anchor for the 45-plus viewer, and it is one of the things that separates Evandale from some of the more remote towns on this list. Launceston commuters have found Evandale, and its median house has risen to around $650,000. That sounds like another entry in the beautiful but expensive column, until you compare it to the Victorian gold towns above, most of which sit at 700 and above and look, by any fair measure, less genuinely Georgian. Evandale is where Tasmania starts keeping the promise, genuinely English, closer to services than most, and cheaper than anything that looks half as convincing. Number 1 has a crossroads with 4 corners, one for temptation, one for salvation, one for recreation, and one for damnation, and it costs less than half a Melbourne flat. Number 2, Penola, South Australia. Nearly 4 hours from Adelaide on the limestone coast, and the first town on this list where the median house drops through the floor, around $380,000, less than half of most towns above it. Petticoat Lane is a preserved heritage lane of hand-built 1850s stone and timber cottages, the kind of lane that survives in a town that never got rich enough to demolish it and replace it with something more modern. That economic modesty is the condition of its survival, and now its value. The town's great claim is Mary MacKillop, Australia's first Catholic saint, who co-founded her first school in Penola in the 1860s. That connection is taken seriously here. Stop at the precinct on a weekday morning and you'll find visitors from across the country doing the same. For a town of this size, the sense of civic significance is genuine. Drive 5 minutes out and you're in the Coonawarra, one of the world's great Cabernet regions, thin terra rossa over limestone, a winemaking landscape with a reputation that extends well beyond Australia. The Saturday afternoon of going to the cellar door is not an occasional luxury here. It is an available routine. The honesty the idea requires is this: Penola's character is more colonial Australian country town than dramatically European. The cottages in Petticoat Lane are genuinely lovely, but they will not fool you into thinking you have arrived in the Dordogne. And nearly 4 hours from Adelaide is real distance for anyone managing an ongoing health condition. That drive, done regularly, becomes a unit of cost and energy that adds up. A saint, a wine region, heritage lanes, and the cheapest address on this list. Penola is honest about what it is and honest about what it isn't. Number 1, Ross, Tasmania. A village of 400 people on the Macquarie River in the quiet inland Midlands. Median house around $420,000, less than half a Melbourne median. Here is why Ross sits at the top of this list rather than Penola or Evandale. It holds the strongest single combination of European visual conviction, genuine historical depth, and a price that is still accessible. Evandale is Georgian and lovely, but the commuter market has pushed it towards $650,000. Penola is affordable but honestly colonial Australian, not European in the way the video's thesis requires. Ross is both genuinely Georgian, genuinely cheap, and the catch is one that a specific kind of retiree can actually live with. Your morning walk takes you past the Ross Bridge, built in 1836 of sandstone and carved with more than 180 individual designs by a convict mason named Daniel Herbert. Herbert was pardoned for the beauty of his work. The bridge is the third oldest still in use in Australia, and it is extraordinary, not in the way that heritage plaques make things sound extraordinary, but in the way that stops you mid-stride and makes you look again at what a person with a chisel and the incentive of freedom could produce in local stone. It is the finest piece of convict craftsmanship in the country, and it is the centerpiece of a village you can walk across in 10 minutes. The crossroads at the center of Ross is known by its 4 corners: temptation, the pub; salvation, the church; recreation, the town hall; damnation, the old jail. Those 4 buildings still stand, still hold their original functions or something close to them, still face each other across the crossroads. That the joke held for nearly 2 centuries says something about a town that does not take itself too seriously. What specialist care looks like from Ross is the honest question this audience needs answered. The town is small, inland and quiet, and it is cheap precisely because of those things. Hobart and Launceston are both drivable, but neither is close. The idea is silent on exact distances, and inventing figures would be dishonest. The practical note is to establish that picture clearly before committing, not after. For anyone who needs city proximity as a weekly reality, Ross will disappoint them. For a retiree who wants English Georgian streets, a working community at village scale, and a house that costs less than a 1-bedroom city flat, Ross is the cleanest answer this country quietly offers. Australia's European towns were built by people who could not forget where they came from. The ones that kept the feeling without keeping the price tag are the ones the boom left behind. And Ross is the clearest example of that on this list. Have you been to any of these towns? Did you get that moment where you forgot briefly you were in Australia? Drop it in the comments. If the Tasmanian Midlands can do Georgian England for under $500,000, the next question is what the rest of Australia's heritage regions are still hiding. That video is coming. Subscribe so you don't miss it.